folks, my name is Laura. I'm going to go through this Leaving Cert history essay with you today from the 2017 paper. It's from the topic The Pursuit of Sovereignty and the Impact of Partition. It's the question about the factors that contributed to partition. Now I'm going to dip in and dip out of different parts of the essay, pointing out, what's good and what could be improved on. But I do recommend you have a read of the entire essay before we start breaking it down, just to have the entire essay in your head, and just it might make a little bit more sense to you when I start talking about different topics and so on. So let's get into it. First of all, let's look at the question itself. You know yourself, you have to make a lot of choices on your Leaving Cert history paper very quickly, and you have to make sure that you have all of the boxes ticked for the examiner. So what are the boxes needing ticking on this particular question? Well, the first thing to always note are the dates. Make sure that your essay covers the entire dates. In this instance, that you start at least 1912 and that you go all the way up to 1920. You are, of course, going to give some context and some background of before 1912, but really important that your essay goes all the way up to 1920. Factors. I'm highlighting that word for you there in relation to one letter in it, the S. Look out for the plurals. That may seem silly and it may seem like something small, but make sure that you don't end up talking about just one thing. So for example, in this essay, you could end up talking about just the violence, that the violence contributed to the partition of Ireland. And of course, that's important. But there was a political side of things as well. Or you could spend far too long talking about the Easter Rising. And that is important, but it's not the entire essay either. So make sure you are talking about the right amount of things. And of course, you're not just going to be listing all of the information that you know about this topic. You are going to be referring back to the question and referring back to how these factors, how these events contributed to partition. What did they lead to? What did they increase? What did they decrease? What did they create? And therefore, Ireland was then partitioned. Okay, so if you're doing all of those things, guys, then you are aware of the question that you're being asked on the day, and the examiner is going to spot that and love that. I mentioned there briefly, the question on the day. A few things here for you guys to have in your mind all the time. When the examiners go to learn about correcting your essays, they are told to make sure that the candidates, that's you guys, are dealing with the set question. Are you answering the question that is being asked on the day? Or are you answering the question that you think is asked or the question that you wish was asked? That you are referring back to the set question in a detailed and accurate way. The other thing the examiners are looking for are detailed, accurate and substantial information. Do you have a substantial amount of facts, dates, evidence, quotes, statistics? It's not just the bare minimum. You need that level, a high level of detail and accuracy in order to sit in that very good or that excellent bracket when the examiner is deciding your mark out of 40. Really important. Keep those details in your head as you're writing your own essays, reading over your own essays, and indeed reading other sample answers. So does this essay do that? And at times it actually does. It really does. The introduction starts off a little bit shaky, actually. I really think this introduction needs a definition of partition. What exactly is being partitioned? That may seem very obvious and very simple to you, but if you've read the entire essay now, it's something that I think is really missing. Be clear that you know what exactly partition is. And I think the person who wrote this essay does know that, but don't forget to actually say it. It does open on a nice, well-expressed sentence, but a little bit more background is needed. Ireland had been part of the UK since the Act of Union 1801. So, this was going up, like partition was kind of coming a long time, and just a bit more context is needed there in order to set the scene. This introduction, it's an example of what I would often say is it's a mix of an introduction and a paragraph 1. There's information in there, particularly in relation to unionists fearing that if they left Britain, Home Rule would be Rome Rule. And that's really should possibly be saved for a little bit further down the essay. So this introduction needs a little bit more clarity in relation to the direction that the essay is taking. So this is what partition is. These years saw a lot of political and social unrest, and this is why, because of the context. And so then off we go, and we're going to look at these various events, the Third Home Rule Bill and the 1916 Rising and the War of Independence, and these are the things that lead to partition. So the introduction in this instance needs a bit of work, it needs a bit of polish. The essay does go on then and has some really, really excellent paragraphs and some things that are really easily improved on as well. So looking firstly at paragraphs 1 and 2, I've spoken already about definitions, and I'm going to repeat myself here, saying that in this paragraph, the definition of home rule is needed, and I'm talking one sentence, because home rule is such an important factor here that it really needs to be clear. This is what home rule would have meant for the people of Ireland. In saying that, this essay does summarise, this paragraph in particular does summarise and explain some tricky enough concepts, such as the Parliament Act of 1911 there in that paragraph. And it does use the words of the set question. Remember what I was saying about the marking scheme? Am I referring back to the set question? The campaign was to contribute to clear divisions between North and South and play a role in the eventual partition of Ireland. Lovely. Lovely awareness of the question there. Brilliant. The paragraphs are linked in this instance, lovely. Remember, there should be a kind of a thread running through your Leaving Cert history essay. It's not just separate chunks of information that aren't related. They are related, and then you need to make sure that it's clear how they are related. So in response, lovely comparison phrase there. Lots of statistics, accurate, relevant information, quite substantial information indeed here. And again, at the end of this paragraph, it is engaging in historical analysis and argument. It's going back over all the little statistics and all the information that I've given you there. And now, well, what does this have to do with the question? I'm going to analyse those things that I've said to you there. This covenant was a key factor in the partition of Ireland as it directly opposed the idea of, So I'm not just saying that it was a key factor, I'm explaining why as well. Really, really excellent there. I'm going to move down the essay a little bit to paragraphs 6 and 7 now. So I'm a good bit down in the chronology of things now. But this essay is very well planned and it's very well laid out. It's in order. Good chronology and variety of paragraph length. Obviously, some events are far more important than others, so they should, by nature, those paragraphs should be a little bit longer. And that can be a mistake, I suppose, that some students make, that you think that every paragraph should look, kind of about half a page in length. That's not the case with history at all. So don't be afraid if you have lots of paragraphs and they're of different lengths. That's lovely. This paragraph talks about kind of the rise of Sinn Féin and their success in the 1918 general election. But I do think that in this instance, there could be a bit more meat in that evidence. More detail and analysis of the results of the elections in the South and in the North, because that would illustrate the deepening divide and the growing popularity of Sinn Féin's desire for a full republic, which ultimately, of course, leads to the War of Independence, which leads to partition. So that could just be kind of hammered home a little bit more there. And again, a typical thing, guys, when you're writing your essays, a lot of people, they start off brilliant and they have all of the ingredients, they're referring to the question and they're linking their paragraphs. And then as the essay goes on, it can be very easy to drop the ball. And sometimes those things are dropped, such as referring to the question or linking the paragraphs. And this, unfortunately, is an example of that. If you look at the end of paragraph 6, they began to set up their own government in Ireland, which directly led to the War of Independence. The War of Independence lasted just over 2 years. Can you hear how it doesn't really sound right? So those paragraphs could be linked in a bit more eloquent way. I know it's not an English essay, but some of those English essay writing skills are needed here, especially for that OE, the overall evaluation, the 40 marks that I spoke about in relation to the marking scheme. Paragraph 7 mentions that it further reinforced Unionist support for partition in relation to the War of Independence. Well, how exactly did it do that? This essay, it's not about the War of Independence specifically, but this paragraph needs a couple of examples of events from the War of Independence that highlighted the increasing tension, the increasing violence, the overall support for the IRA, the hatred for the black and tans, all of those things which further polarised Ireland into those two communities of nationalists and unionists, which ultimately then leads to partition. So that just needs to be elaborated on a bit more in that instance there. In saying that, this paragraph does end with a well-expressed sentence and using the words of the question, this act finalised the division of Ireland into 2 separate states. Lovely. Ultimately, this is what led to partition, but a different kind of a phrasing, variety of language use. Lovely. The conclusion of this essay is the last thing that I'm going to talk about here. Your essay really has to finish strong. You have to have a conclusion. You're going to lose a lot of marks if you don't have any conclusion at all. Remember, your essay is a cycle, beginning, middle and end. It has to have those 3 things. So what is good about this particular conclusion? I would call this an excellent conclusion. There are some parts of the essay that are excellent, some parts that are not, but it does end quite well. It summarises the arguments made very well using listing, which is not necessarily always an easy thing to do. So have a read of that conclusion. You can see how this person has listed everything that they've said. They've used good language and good expression, and they have talked about the wider context. That final sentence, that division still exists to the present time. So it doesn't simply just end at 1920. It pushes it out just that little bit past 1920, placing this topic in the wider context. So folks, that brings me to the end of my essay breakdown today. I hope you found it helpful. I want to remind you that the full essay is analysed on Studyclix in PDF format if you'd like a bit more detail on the paragraphs that I didn't specifically mention today. And I hope to speak to you all again. Bye bye.